Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today I'm going to be covering this book, Words from a Wide Land, written by William D. Barney. This is a collection of poems and journal entries written by a late Texas poet laureate. The inner cover reads, "If you enjoyed books like A Sand County Almanac or A Pilgrim at Tinker's Creek, you'll love Words from a Wide Land." Barney brings insights of people and places, natural phenomena, birds, animals, insects, and other living things he has encountered in many years of living and traveling. In these entries, a year's worth, though not in chronological order by year, can be found humor, romance, delight, philosophy, even terror. He has measured the life about him with a flair, which at time bursts into poetry. So he was a past president of the Poetry Society of Texas and a member of the Poetry Society of America. He was appointed Poet Laureate of Texas in 1982. He won 2 Texas Institute of Letters awards, as well as the Robert Frost Memorial Award for a narrative poem, accepting the award from Frost himself in 1962. Now, this, like I said, is a book of poems and journal entries. I'm going to read a few that may provide insight into the kind of person William D. Barney was. I don't know exactly how closely he'd agree with some of my observations, but he does have a lot of moments that were humble or almost pastoral, very calm, very gentle. And he also has some about raging storms and turbulent events in his life. He also has a couple entries that seem to be in the day of or the day after a moment in history. For example, a good one is on November 22nd, 1963. I went out before noon to do some Christmas shopping in the Dallas stores and let others in my office go later so that they could see him. No one could walk through the streets without feeling an uneasiness in the air. I saw a traffic patrolman taking off his yellow rain gear. The sun was breaking through the clouds. Later, back in my office, I heard the carillon in the Mercantile Bank playing Hail to the Chief, and shortly thereafter it turned suddenly to What a Friend We Have in Jesus. What in the world are they playing that for? I asked the secretary. Abruptly, an engineer came to my door. Can you stand a shock? He asked. Sure. The president has been shot. That was November 22nd, the day of JFK's assassination. It is a journal entry about how mundane his life was until that shock. Doing some Christmas shopping, letting people out to go do theirs, that kind of thing. My grandma actually has a story about heading towards Juarez to pick up a wedding dress that day. She would be married a few days later on Thanksgiving. On her way, when she left Las Cruces, JFK was still alive, but by the time they got to the borders were closed and JFK had been assassinated. He had been shot. Another one that I kind of had to ask my grandma about because as my only living grandparent, she is the only one who could really provide certain insight into a certain generation, an older generation. And there's a line early in the year, January 21st, 1969. One of the poems is unusual, and I had to ask my grandma about it because it just seemed very progressive. The idea I had of this guy was he might end up being a conservative Texan, but January 21st, and I was reading this day by day throughout last year, 2022, I saw this on January 21st, and I had to save it and ask my grandma about something in it. In the woods, every once in a while, I see the blasted trunk of a tree, bare of bark, disclosing a body ruinously twisted. Not in one part only, but throughout, so that I wonder if the roots are tortuous. Why a tree grows thus in a forest of 1,000 of normal grain, I do not know. Maybe like a man with an extra chromosome. I know nothing in the life of a tree that would justify calling it a sinner. That last line sticks out. For the metaphor he was talking about was just a forest, and then he mentions, like a man with an extra chromosome. I know nothing in the life of a tree that would justify calling it a sinner. And I had to ask my grandma if she could provide some insight on that. She thought maybe he was talking about not necessarily trans folk, but that back in the 60s, if you were to refer to someone with an extra chromosome, you may be referring to someone that was gay, that was effeminate, that was less masculine than was expected of them. And so that was a really interesting observation. And she said, in her mind, having heard that, it was likely he was a very progressive, very forgiving person. I withheld judgment until I read through the rest of the year. There's one poem here that's very religious, but in a joking manner. What I got throughout the year's reading was that William D. Barney was religious and devoutly so, Christian. But November 24th, 1973 reads, while I sat in the choir, the thought came to me. Satan appears to Christ in the wilderness. Your name, he says, has been chosen as one of the leading prophets of our time. We want to include your biography in our new directory. These are those. But you must hurry. Our offer closes this month. And then he mentions offhandedly, it will only cost you $50 to have your very own copy. So I think he had some interesting thoughts on temptation and how the devil might approach people. There's a couple others I'm going to read, both from June. I think they provide insight into his outlook, really. And one of them is just very wholesome and romantic almost. It reads, June 6th, 1976. You, lady, are a collection of lyrics, beside whom other women are mere reference books. The word lady is capitalized. I'm not certain if he means Mary. It would be weird because he's not Catholic, or at least it doesn't seem that he is Catholic. And my understanding is a lot of Protestants kind of look at Mary very differently than the way Catholics do. So if he's Christian but not Catholic, lady being capitalized referring to Mary seems strange. But if he is referring to, say, his wife, it may be very romantic and touching in a certain way. June 14th reads, 1979, the toad, though he molt his skin 1,000 times, will still be a toad. A man ought to be a kind of toad, who somewhere has learned to pass through being skinned alive, to come forth a higher creature. Another example of the way the author refers to certain types of Christianity with skepticism. Another good example is May 11th, 1977. The morning mail tells me the world is full of saviors, albeit none can guarantee to accomplish salvation without I send more money. The author seems to be very cynical towards a certain kind of Christianity, the very greedy kind. A lot of his statements in his poems make him out to be a very Christian. He takes Jesus' teachings to heart, so that compassion toward gay people, that spite towards people with these different campaigns, all these ways to make money off of faith, he is very against, and that shows up in his poem throughout the year. But he also has a reverence for all of creation that spills out in a beautiful and touching way. His reverence shows up in a lot of his poems. On May 16th, 1969, he writes, no discovery like coming upon for the first time a rich and generous mind, one filled with its own peculiar perspective, opening broad dimensions, disclosing a unique interior landscape. That one I really absolutely adore. I don't know who he's talking about, but it sounds like he really enjoyed a conversation with someone. And lastly, I'm going to leave off with a journal about a day in his life. May 15th, 1984. I went to a pharmacy to check my blood pressure, being alarmed at the reading I had just made at a grocery, where I had taken it without resting first. Here I sat down beside a black woman and read a magazine. She had a friend, another black woman in her 60s, sitting on the only other bench. A white man about our age came in and took a reading on the machine, then turned to the first black woman. "I'm going to live to 110, he said. Then he added, "And I'm going to drink a lot of whiskey and mess around with women." The black women chuckled. The older one said, "You gonna think about messing with women?" He then told of a black man, 100 years old, who lives up on the black cemetery property on 28th Street. That 100-year-old man still did some padding. And you know why he was able? He eats some greens and some fruit every day. I do not know what he meant by patting, Patting, but it certainly sounds like he's talking about a healthy 100-year-old man. The dialogue between "I'm going to drink a lot of whiskey and mess with a lot of women" to get the response, "You're gonna think about messing with women." It's just such a funny interaction. At this point, he is 60. It's just really funny to me. Anyway, this was a man who had fun, had deep, interesting thoughts. He was observant. He kept a log of his life, and eventually it was compiled into this book. I bought it for $5 at Coas. I absolutely enjoyed this book. Near July-ish or so, I started slowing down and I would read it in bursts once a month or once every other month, but the slowing pace of how I enjoyed this book did not mean I enjoyed it less. I think if you want to read a particular perspective or want to read some of the poems that I didn't read to you, I would recommend you finding this book and checking it out. It was a very nice collection of poems and journal entries. So yeah, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.